Today's episode is sponsored by Golgotha, a historical murder mystery set in the First World War trenches and based around true events. When the rumour of a murdered soldier that had been found crucified in no man's land sweeps the Allied trenches, this threatens an army-wide rebellion. One soldier from each nation's army is pulled from the ranks to join a team to investigate the crime, and what they discover will change the course of the war. Welcome to Bone Room's reviewing of documentaries. Now, the idea had been to review natural history documentaries, but that flew out the window when I realised that I have a love of all sorts of documentaries, and I'd be doing myself a disservice just by concentrating on just that one type. Now, before we start, I should point out I feel the greatest tragedy for the world is that I have zero musical talent, playing or singing. I sound like I'm killing livestock with nail clippers. I am, however, a rocker at heart, and love a great documentary about the music and the musicians I love. And there is one rock star that I feel deserves a little bit of attention at the moment on this channel. Now, I love Dave Grohl and the Foo Fighters, and I've been lucky enough to see them a few times, once in Chicago, but more importantly I got to catch them at Dave's home gig playing in DC, back when I lived there.
How many fucking songs did Taylor say he said how many songs? We did not. Bullshit. Katie, how many songs did Taylor say?
This show was kind of odd, because in many ways it became an autobiography, with Dave talking about his time living in Virginia and the places he went to, the people he knew, the bands he followed. So it's no surprise to me that he's become something of a serious storyteller. What I'm not sure about, however, is when Dave Grohl became the documentary king.
Didn't have that experience together.
There's no guarantee that it will ever pay off. The reward has to be the experience.
That's what we are. We share our love through music.
Did you ever feel like giving up and going home?
Never. Now, obviously, with a successful band, there will be always documentaries around their touring and creating new albums, things like that, and the history of its members. And we certainly have those with the Foo Fighters. But somewhere along the line, Dave began to expand his interests. Now, to be fair, they are arguably still the same interests, but like many storytellers, it seems a tale has got into his head, and he eventually had to do something with it. Now, this seems to have all begun in 2013 with Sound City, the first documentary that Dave directed about the history of the Sound City recording studios in California. I love this documentary, and I will say it's not so much about the Sound City recording studios as more about the Neve 820 console that was used at the studios to record many of the world's most popular albums. And there is a fantastic montage, and I'll see if I can put it in here. And if I can, you're probably watching it now.
But walking down the hallway and seeing all of those platinum records on the wall, that's what I'm talking about.
Tom Petty,
Fleetwood Mac,
Neil Young, man.
Cheap Trick,
Chili Peppers,
Pat Benatar,
Guns N' Roses, Nine Inch Nails, Foreigner,
Rat,
Johnny Cash.
Metallica.
Dude, how many music albums have been made there?
We chose Sound City because Nevermind was recorded there.
All these rock stars going to the studios and seeing all the gold records on the wall, and it's a fantastic documentary. If you get a chance to see it, I would look for it. This was then followed in 2014 by Sonic Highways, which was something of an autobiography about the band creating their new album, with each song being written and produced in one city that is a major music city within USA, and usually looking into the type of music that that city is renowned for. I hope to do something about these documentaries and maybe do one of these reviews at some point about those two, but for now, we're going to be talking about Dave's most recent release, which is What Drives Us. I'm going to say this isn't the documentary you think it's going to be, which is usually a really good thing. And it is in this case. I love this documentary. You start off thinking it's going to be about rock and roll. And then after a while you start to think, oh, it's about how you can make it as a rock star, with all these proven rock stars telling you what it takes to make it. But then it suddenly slips into, nope, this isn't about that at all. It's about the van. As in the van that drives them, specifically how young bands all jump into a van and tour around in their attempt to make it in the music industry.
All of the biggest bands in the world started started out like this.
You got to get in the van if you want to make it in this business.
I wanted to be with people that wanted to make music, record, and get in a van and go experience the world.
We would hit the stage in between like those long drives, and when we were doing those van tours, it was us against the world.
Now, it's interesting because Dave actually looks into his first van. Now, I don't think it's the first van of his music career. I think it's the van that the Foo Fighters first toured around in when they became the Foo Fighters. And the idea was that they were going to tour around and treat themselves. He was already a massive music star, but it's the forging of a band inside this tiny little vehicle driving around from city to city that he believes makes them into the band they are today. That without that experience, if you just go around in your bus and you don't kind of be forged together by the nastiness of the smells and the farts and the food and the tiredness, that it actually can splinter a group apart. Like, you don't become the band that you want to be. You just become four separate individuals who get together occasionally and make some music.
What happens in the van is the foundation of who we become.
You just can't find anything like pulling into a truck stop at 3 a.m.
It creates this unique perspective that we all share.
You have to go through hell and high water, to put it lightly.
Am I willing to give up everything for this dream?
People just want to kill you for the color of your skin. It was crazy.
You have to go till your throat's dead.
A lot of the attraction to doing this was the unknown. You were free.
Now, this documentary, I found it amazing because of the personalities that you recognize just by single names. For example, they talk to Ringo, Flea, Lars, Edge, Slash, Duff, and that's just a couple of the people that they talk to. Dave really gets to talk to a lot of people about the history of rock and roll and how they used to tour around. It's quite amazing. So you're watching this documentary about how young bands used to tour around and how it still has an influence on them today. But I will say, this documentary then takes a bit of a turn. And it starts actually introducing you to the mechanics of why these bands toured and why they became so good. Because quite frankly, when you start your tour, you're in a tiny little van, you don't have a lot of money, you're probably going to the smallest places that'll book you, and you are rehearsing, you are practicing, you are improving your skill set, you are getting good at your job, and eventually you might get good enough that you can break away from this type of touring, get out of the van, maybe get into a bigger van, or then a touring bus, or then eventually a touring plane, and that's when you've truly made it. So it's an important kind of step in this evolution of a rock band. Now, one of my favourite bits is in the documentary. They're talking to Lars, the drummer from Metallica, which was arguably the biggest band in the world for quite a few years. And he just sat down, and when Dave told him what the documentary is about, he's like,
I've actually never toured in a van.
Okay.
So, can I go now?
Yes.
Lars has always had a bit of a weird sense of humour, and he's quite funny in this. Now, one of the main characters in this documentary turns out to be Flea, the bass player from Red Hot Chili Peppers. Now, a lot of you may not be aware, Flea is Australian. He was born in Melbourne. And it actually goes back into his history a little bit and talks about his first musical instrument and his first love, which is jazz. And as a very small child, he played the trumpet. And it goes into quite a deep biography of his hard life as a small child, and his playing the trumpet was the way he just got away from everything. By blowing into the trumpet, he blew away all the troubles of his life and just was transported to somewhere else. And Flea becomes, like, he's in this a lot. He keeps coming back, and he's got a lot to say. It's actually quite amazing. If you like the Red Hot Chili Peppers, make sure you watch this documentary, because you do get quite a bit from Flea. And the very last thing that he says is, which is why I love these documentaries, because it kind of motivates you. Not everyone's going to be a musician, and not everyone's going to be a rock star, but you are all something. We are all something. We are all mechanics. We're all writers. Whatever we are, you can be the best at what you do. And one of the last things, one of the motivating things that he says at the end is, the greatest tragedy is not to sing the song inside of you. And as I said, doesn't have to be a song, could be a book, could be a painting, could be anything. We all have art inside of us, and that art can come out in many different ways. And the tragedy is if you ignore that artistic side of yourself and just let it wither and die. Express yourself, and you will always be a lot happier for it. Now, throughout the documentary, we're talking about creative people, and they do keep saying very clever creative things. One of them is that when you're in a band and you're touring around like this, it's like a family touring about trying to kill each other, which I thought was a great line. But another one was that they are pirates, that when you're in a band, you're a pirate, that you're setting sail across the land in your vehicle, raiding the youth of each region, that you're plundering the world, which is just a fantastic image, that rock bands are groups of pirates setting out across the mighty seas of the great unknown, visit far-off places and entertain people. Now, as all these bands and all these famous people come out and start telling their stories, there are some themes that very quickly start to present themselves as each artist recounts their time touring around in a van. Childhood becomes a very important part, either because of their influences. Now, this could be either their music tastes first began with maybe family members or friends introducing them to music. And that can often happen in a car or something like that, but that it was in their childhood that they learnt their love of music, and then they just had that burning desire, that's all they wanted to be, and that just being at school, starting a band is a way to go. But then there's other people like Flea, who talk about their childhoods and the terrible things that they went through, and that music was a way of them escaping their childhood, that becoming a musician, becoming a band member was a way to get out of town, to leave these crappy little places where they grew up and move off into the greater, wider world so that they can find their own place. Because believe me, I've traveled the world, I've lived in a lot of places. There are places out there for everyone. You've just got to have the courage to get out there and find your place in the world. Now, occasionally, things also do get quite serious, because we are talking about artistic people where their lives are intrinsically put into their music, but also that this sort of lifestyle isn't for everyone, and it can become quite nasty, that you're on the road, you're drinking, you're taking drugs, you're meeting strange people, you are in a very strange microcosm of a world, and for some people, this became too much, that they became alcoholics, that they became drug addicts, and that it was the road that was actually destroying them. They had to get off the road, or they have to change the way that they did things.
Why do you do this to yourself? Why do you punish yourself that much?
There is no pain when you're on stage. The pain comes during life.
So for this light-hearted documentary about vans and people driving around and starting bands and things, there is a serious side to it. And there is, again, something to be learned from that, that, you know, even what some people consider a perfect lifestyle, a fun lifestyle, can have a dark side. Be aware of the pitfalls, and you can hopefully overcome them. But at the end of the day, it is a documentary about driving around in a van, and there is a lighter side. One of the things I really enjoy, because myself, I started off as a storeman, working for shop centres where the trucks would come in and you got to move all the goods out and pack them and store them in warehouses and things like that. That they start talking about who do you pick in the band to pack the van, that it's like Tetris, that when you've got all this equipment, you've got amps, you've got guitars, you've got drum kits, and they're all going into the one vehicle, that packing that vehicle has to be done in a very certain way, a very specific way. And you have to learn that quite quickly, how to put it all in there, because you don't want to be spending hours and hours every day. And I've done this. When I was working for the National Dinosaur Museum, I got to tour around for 2 weeks in a truck, taking a museum to all these locations across New South Wales. And I might show you some of the footage here. And I had to pack up all of these fossils and these mechanical dinosaurs and these boxes of display goods, and set them up every day, and then every day pack it down, put it back in the van, drive to the next location, unload the van again, and after a while you get it in a pattern. You know exactly how to do it, how to pack it away so it's nice and quick and everything's safe and secure. So it's an important part, and that just tickled me. I quite enjoyed that part of the documentary. And at last, there is a moment for us documentary nerds like myself. Dave begins to interview Aerosmith's frontman, Steve Tyler. And he does so sitting in an odd little van with a groovy painting of a dude walking on the side. Now, for those eagle-eyed viewers out there, you may recognize this van from an episode of American Pickers.
The first thing we see is Aerosmith. I mean, plain as day, but it's not the Aerosmith logo.
Wow, look at that guy, man.
That looks like the...
Keep on trucking.
Yeah.
Keep on trucking, dude.
And it's got some keep on trucking dude on it. I mean, the paint is detailed, but I'm confused by that.
So we don't know if this is a fan's depiction, you know, of somebody just
somebody that likes the band.
Yeah.
When the lads discovered this van, which is a 1964 International Harvester Metro, which I had to look up, rotting away in the woods of a Massachusetts property. They realised this was probably Aerosmith's original van, or at least somehow connected to the Aerosmith band because it had Aerosmith painted on it. The guys bought it with the intention of fixing it up. Well, it turns out the American Picket guys did. They actually found an identical truck, which they used for parts. They got it back together again, and then Aerosmith actually heard about this, and then they eventually approached the American Picket guys and asked, could we buy the van off you? And I do believe the van is currently with Aerosmith, which I believe they're playing in Las Vegas at the moment. And so it's in the foyer, so you can see the van when you come in. So there's another little thing that I love, is that when you watch these sorts of things and you watch enough documentaries, you start to connect them all together. So documentaries like this are often lighthearted, but they often have an underlying message. And there's a couple of messages in this, but definitely the most important message is the one that comes through right at the end, which is,
did you ever feel like giving up and going home?
Never. Never give up.
Never give up. Never give up your dreams. Never give up your goals. Never give up what you want to do. That it may take years, it may take decades, but with hard work and a little bit of luck, you can get there. So just never give up. Now, the documentary, What Drives Us, is currently on Amazon Prime. And I highly suggest you go and watch it because it's a really great documentary. I quite enjoyed it, especially if you're a fan of the Foo Fighters or rock and roll. And before we go, I'd like to point out that I did a little look around on the intranets and I discovered there is something of a supplemental video for this documentary that you can watch all about the series. Or more precisely, you can watch about Dave's love of vans, which he shares with Brian Johnson from AC/DC.
Sure makes mine look like shit.
And on YouTube, there are a couple of videos of those two meeting up in some weird car park, showing the current vans that they're driving and talking about how they used to drive around in these vans in the good old days. And I'll put the links to these below as well, so you can watch those. It's a nice little extra piece. So there you go. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you stick around for some of the more reviews that will be coming out shortly.